Hello, and welcome back to the Afrolit Digital Den, where we are taking time out of our day to read the precious works from our ancestors and from our elders, works that are seminal documents, seminal pieces to helping us put together our historical consciousness, thus restoring our historical agency, which will help repair what has been done to us, the atrocities that have been done to us as a people. And we have been reading Chinweizu's Decolonizing the African Mind. Okay, let me pull that up here. And in our last reading, we left off on the crisis of maldevelopment. Chinweizu has been really opening our eyes to the problem. We can't really call third world countries developing countries. They're really maldeveloping. And he kind of gave us a sense of what that means for maldevelopment. It's that these people who are in charge of these countries want to stay there, and there's certain perks that come along with leadership. And like we mentioned in the last video, if you are a leader that is demoralized and despiritualized, then of course you're focusing on the material aspects of leadership instead of the spiritual aspects of leadership. And I love to use Dr. Leonard Jeffries' pyramid analysis because within the pyramid, he has a circle within, and then he has a circle. So you have internal and then external. Within that internal circle, you have materialism versus spiritualism. So if you are a person that is more materialistic in your nature, then that's going to drive your decisions. That's going to drive your motives and your desires. But if you are a person that's more spiritual, then that's going to drive your decisions, your motives, your values, your interests. So a lot of these elitists, African leaders, bourgeoisie, are material in nature because of our miseducation. We have been literally removed from our culture, removed from our values, removed from our interests and principles. And it has literally been replaced with little to nothing. They've hollowed us out so that we can just be permanent servants. And the little education that they give us is to help maintain the way things are, help maintain white supremacy. And so, as an elitist or a bourgeoisie, I want to get as close to whiteness as possible. So, we call that white proximity. And so, and getting close to whiteness, now I get to enjoy the perks of this position. So I get to enjoy the beautiful fancy homes, the beautiful cars, the traveling on private jets, access to anywhere that I want to go in the world. I get to be in the room. I get, delicious meals. Like there's so much that goes along with these high positions. And if you are driven by materialism, then you want to make sure that that is not interrupted. You want this for life. And so that is what Chinweizu has been saying that contributes to the maldevelopment, is that these leaders really in their proximity to whiteness don't give a damn about developing their countries. They want to just feed themselves and their children and their children's children, right? And so at some point, this does not work because it's not the African way. And if we want to get back to the African way, then we have to let our spirits get back in charge. Let that be the influence. And when we say spirit, we're talking about our divine faculties and our moral faculties, right? So that's where we bring Ma'at in. Dr. Malefe Ketiasante says that Dr. Na Dove created this term Ma'at, ma, ma, Ma'atism or Ma'atanization, Ma'atnize. I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly, but bringing Ma'at back into the picture, right? Justice, truth, order, righteousness, balance, harmony, that drives the decisions. And so I'm not running after, this fancy vehicle or a fancy home, fancy, luxurious uh, accessories and clothing. That's not the purpose. I need to make sure that my people have what they need. And so I've been watching the leader of Burkina Faso, um, His Excellency Traore Ibrahim. I think it's Ibrahim Traore, where he is putting the needs of the people first. And that's something to be commended, right? So he is allowing the spirit to influence his decisions, not the materialism. So when we look at the crisis of maldevelopment, he says here, but circumstances have arisen which threaten the cargo cult maldevelopment racket. With growing populations and rising consumer expectations in their countries, third world elites have needed to import more and more and have come to need enormous amounts of foreign exchange. They have therefore sought more aid, more loans, and higher prices for their exports in order to raise more cash. This has pitted them against their allies in the West who do not want to pay more for raw materials or to give more aid or to grant more loans to risky customers whose debts are already enormous. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, as guardian of the Western financial system, is averse to giving good credit ratings to third world regimes unless they obey IMF dictates on how to run their economies. Wow. So now that is what Coffee Opoke, Opoke. I'm thinking I said his name correctly, but let me make sure that I said it right. He was saying that, you know, when you borrow, there's an African proverb that he used about borrowing, like borrowing water does not remove the thirst or something like that. I know I'm botching it up, but his name is Kofi, Coffee, Asare, Asur, Opoku, Asare Opaku. Okay, sorry about that if I botched the name up. But he used the African proverb. You can't keep borrowing, right? You can't keep borrowing water. So when you borrow from these people, they get to set the terms, right? So they dictate how to run your economy. But to comply with the IMF, conditions would mean a drastic reduction in the compensation of imports. And this could be, and this could delegitimize third world regimes. So rather than go along with a racket which now threatens to undermine the consumerist basis of their political legitimacy, these regimes demand that the terms of the racket be revised to their advantage and for their salvation. Hence, their clamor for a new international economic order. Wait, so rather than go along with a racket which now threatens to undermine the consumerist basis of their political legitimacy, these regimes demand that the terms of the racket be revised. So we're going to keep the racket, but revise the terms. So now we're going to have a new international economic order. Okay. Their campaign has been supported by a section of the Western leadership, which fears that without reforms, the whole racket could collapse with grievous losses to both partners. It has therefore lobbied the hardline majority in the West for more aid, for softer loans, and for schemes to stabilize prices for third world products. It has also been lobbying third world regimes for a basic needs approach to development, which would spread imports and services to the large majority beyond elite circles. This section of the Western leadership would like the Western hardliners to accept that with a basic needs approach, aid and soft loans would not only finance short term exports from the West, but would also spread the habit for Western consumer products to many more people in the third world. This would lay the groundwork for even more exports in the longer run. Besides a basic needs approach, would concentrate third world efforts away from the building of those heavy industries without which they could never rival the advanced industrial nations. In other words, that a basic needs approach would reinforce pressures for cargo cult consumerism in the third world. Whew, there was a lot said there because when you think about basic needs, so essentially these alliances are saying, okay, let's revise the terms of the racket and let's focus on basic needs, right? So it has also been lobbying third world regimes for a basic needs approach to development, which would spread imports and services to the large majority beyond the elite circles. So now the trickle down effect, if you will, gets to the masses. And this section of the Western leadership would like the Western hardliners to accept that with a basic needs approach, aid and soft loans would not only finance short term exports from the West, but would also spread the habit for Western consumer products to many more people in the third world. So it would shape their taste and their preferences and create people wanting more of these products coming from the outside instead of wanting to produce their own. But none of this lobbying and mediating has moved the North South negotiations forward. The West adamantly refuses to give up advantages and profitable interests, which took it centuries to accumulate, and would gladly have the negotiations ended. The third world, in growing desperation, tries to keep alive these elegant, well publicized but futile begging sessions, which masquerade as negotiations. You're right, they are begging sessions. Please, more aid. Please, more loans. Oh my gosh. You can only laugh because you want to cry. Why? They supply the stage for a morality play, which allows third world leaders to offload onto the North the blame for chronic third world poverty. The general intra, let's see, intransignience of the North, the general intransignience of the North, its refusal to redistribute resources to the South, its curtailment of aid, its refusal to be guilt tripped into public admissions of past exploitation. All this is dramatized for the third world public by the highly publicized negotiations of which Cancun is a symbol. I'm going to look up that word intransignience. Intransignience. Ooh, I can't pronounce it. The message which, okay, let's see here. The morality play is meant to convey to the people of the third world is that third world leaders are fighting hard for the welfare of their people. But it is the wicked, greedy, and shameless West which denies them the means to development. So it's all a sham. But the true causes of chronic third world poverty are rather different from what this cargo cult morality play would have us believe. The prime obstacles to development are the third world elites' lack of that autonomous will to industrial development, which motivated the capitalist pioneers of the West, and their lack of that dread of Western invasion, which drove the Soviets to their draconian strategy of socialist industrialization. What third world elites want is to reap as much as they can of the consumerist benefits of northern industry. For that, they would like to preserve their dependency ties to the West. Therefore, when they have criticized dependency, it has not been in order to abolish it, but to reform it for their greater consumerism and local power. Oh, gosh. I I'm blown. I'm blown because it makes you see, there's various presidents that go around talking um, about the tragedies of how the third world got to be the way it is. And yet, behind closed doors, it's all a facade. Like, I'm thinking of this one president in East Africa who has been president for a minute and I think just rewrote the laws to extend the term. And it's like, when I think about him, this fits the bill. It fits the bill. And when I think of him, I'm like, oh, because when you go on YouTube and you type this guy's name in, he's all over, giving these speeches and, enjoying the perks of being the president and enjoying the perks of the power. But essentially, when they have criticized dependency, it has not been in order to abolish it. Essentially, he does not want to abolish dependency, but to reform it for their greater consumerism and local power. I'm now thinking of different African leaders in a different way. And that's all I'll say about that. All right, towards development. Maybe we have some solutions here. Is Chinwezu going to give us a pathway out of this racket, this debacle? But that may be changing now. The failure of North-South negotiations to save the maldevelopment racket, together with the general crisis of the world economy, appears to be finally driving third world elites to consider such hitherto unappealing measures as South-South cooperation. Should they also ever realize that the crisis of maldevelopment is indeed terminal and that only genuine national development will, in future, supply those material goods without which they would lose legitimacy, then these elites might find it in their interest to abandon maldevelopment altogether and go in for development. In that event, South-South cooperation would be conducted in the spirit of development and as an adjunct to and facilitator of national development. Only then would the cooperation be between energetic, developing economies rather than between moribund and maldeveloped ones. But for all that to happen, third world elites must accept that domestic industrial productivity is the only sure fount of national prosperity and power. So for all this to happen, so here's some of the solution here. So for all that to happen, third world elites must accept that domestic industrial productivity, you have to produce on your own land, is the only sure fount of national prosperity and power. That's the only way. You cannot rely on these external goods coming to you. Therefore, any country which desires development must mobilize itself for the social transformation with all its inevitable upheavals, whereby an industrial culture is fashioned. It must accept that the enterprise of development is one of imaginative and inventive hard work, not of waiting for miracles of heavenly cargoes. Or for the miracles of foreign aid, technology transfers, and capital imports. And I think that's what's been happening for so long. But the youth is actually very aware of the faults of the elite leaders. And the youth, they're tired. They're like, we're not going to put up with what our parents put up with. I'm really proud of the youth for that. This is where the failures of the third world intelligentsia could be a severe handicap. All of them, of whatever stripe, need to appreciate that monographs on the conflicts between traditionalism and modernity, myths about the stages of takeoff, marvelous descriptions of internal class contradictions and of external dependency relations are of little practical value until two things are understood: that the plunder of the third world by the West is only part of the set of factors responsible for third world poverty and Western prosperity, and that attention must focus on how the industrial wealth of nations, East as well as West, was first created and is maintained by their national cultures and organizations. Okay, so he's giving us some things to think about. All right, so he's saying here, let me see if I can find. So he's saying marvelous descriptions of internal class contradictions and external dependency relations are of little practical value until two things are understood. So he's saying two things must be understood. One, that the plunder of the third world by the West is only part of the set of factors. So that's only part of it. We know it's there. It's only part of it. Attention must focus on how the industrial wealth of nations, East as well as West, was first created. Okay, so how was it first created? And maintained by their national cultures. Look at that. National cultures, right? So if we come together as a people and create a national culture between the diaspora and our brothers and sisters on the continent, we can create and maintain industrial wealth. Okay, that's giving us some things to think about. To the extent that dependency relations contribute to third world poverty, the mechanisms elaborated and the powers accumulated by the West for maintaining such relations have to be dismantled. It is foolish to expect them to be dismantled by negotiation or by the manipulation of whatever strands of guilt some Westerners feel about their history, or by self-righteously denouncing Western self-interest. So these dependency relations here, we got to look at that. So to the extent that dependency relations contribute to third world poverty, gosh, this dependency contributes to third world poverty, the mechanisms elaborated and the powers accumulated by the West for maintaining such relations have to be dismantled. Oh, gosh. All right, so we got the mechanisms elaborated and the power accumulated for maintaining these relations, these dependency relations, have to be dismantled. And like what Amos Wilson would say, neutralized. So what are the mechanisms and what are the powers that have been used to create this dependency relationship? Once we identify those, we have to neutralize and dismantle them. It is foolish to expect them to be dismantled by negotiation. The West is not going to give up their powers that easily. Or by the manipulation of whatever strands of guilt some Westerners feel about their history, or by self righteously denouncing Western self interest. That's not going to happen. After all, the third world elite's campaign for a new international economic order is based on its own self interest, is it not? Because they want to maintain the dependency. The third world intelligentsia needs to make it clear that development will depend on the will. Oh, let's highlight that. Okay, so what he's saying, academia, scholars, intelligentsia, we need to make it clear that development will depend on the will to develop and on strategies which reckon on northern resistance and hostility rather than its benevolence and charity. So charity does not work. So what is he saying here? Development will depend on the will to development. Do you want to develop? And on strategies which reckon on northern resistance and hostility rather than its benevolence and charity. So we need resistance rather than its benevolence. We don't need your charity and your niceness. No, we don't want you. We don't want it. We want it. We want freedom. We want liberation. The North cannot be expected to voluntarily sacrifice its interests for the benefit of the South. Yeah, we should not. Should any third world country become sufficiently motivated to undertake development, it should recognize the following as among the crucial tasks to which it should address itself. One, it must sufficiently disengage, or even secede from the Western economic system in order to avoid being further plundered of resources it would need for its own development. Wow. Disengage, check out. Wow. I think that's what Ibrahim Traore is doing. It's showing France. We're disengaging. We are succeeding from neocolonialism. This implication of dependency theory cannot be avoided. Wow. It cannot be avoided. It must help through South-South cooperation to build a third world economic system. I'm wondering, is that what was trying to happen with the BRICS, with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa? I thought that they were trying to come up with some type of economic system that could actually compete against the dollar. It must help through South-South cooperation to build a third world economic system, one from whose systemic linkages it would stand to benefit. For no country is sufficiently large and endowed to be able to dispense with the advantages of international trade between some suitable groups of nations. Number 3, it must uncompromisingly abandon cargo cult maldevelopment and just as uncompromisingly embark upon the social adventure of creating a national industrial culture. And we've been told that. Amos Wilson told us that. We need to create a national industrial culture. It must uncompromisingly abandon cargo cult maldevelopment. Stop bringing in stuff from outside. Those countries which have chosen the socialist road should do what it takes to succeed, and those which have chosen the capitalist road should also do what it takes to succeed. But my problem here is that we need to do what it takes to succeed in a spiritually driven way, not in a materialistically driven way. Because these countries that have chosen to adopt the socialist road, such as Tanzania, or the capitalist road, such as Nigeria or Kenya, we're doing it in a materialist fashion, right? We need to do it in a spiritual way. think that's the problem. We need to actually dump both of these ways and go back to Umoja. Is it Ujama? I think it's Ujama economics. Ujama, which is cooperative economics. If a country should do all three, it may not matter much, as examples of Northern successes demonstrate, which ideological model of society it adopts, capitalist, socialist, or others, according to taste, so long as it adopts one and sticks with it until it accomplishes its own transformation into an industrial culture and society. Okay, I agree with that. I agree. Okay, you can adopt whatever you want to adopt. But the problem that I have is that we cannot leave out spiritualization. We cannot leave that out. We can't leave that out. So whether you're communist, capitalist, socialist, others, so long as it adopts one and sticks with it, Chinwe Zhu, no, 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 no. We have to make sure we do it in a moral and divine spiritual way. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about Christianity. I'm not talking about Islam. I'm not talking about Judaism. I'm talking about our African spiritual way, the way that we did things before we were interrupted by the Arab and the European. All right, I'll stop here. It looks like the next part is Third World's Trap into Peonage. Peonage. Guys, I'm sorry if I am botching up these words here. I'm trying my best to make sure that I pronounce them correctly. All right, we'll see you next time.